Today, I'm going to talk to you about this emphasis on work ethic and what I think is really a myth, which is the idea of discipline and how it's so praised. Because I think that a lot of people actually don't have as much discipline as you might think. A lot of the people that are succeeding as pre-med. But first, I want to just address the reason behind that. I recently was watching a video today about Viktor Frankl, and I actually was first exposed to this author when I read Man's Search for Meaning in one of my classes as an undergraduate. And he's more famous for saying that people that can't find a deep sense of meaning distract themselves with pleasure. But then there's this other thing called Frankel's inverse law, or at least that's what I was told that it's called in the video. I didn't actually hear about this in the class or get any exposure to it in the book I read. But the inverse law basically says people who struggle to find pleasure focus all of their energy on things that they think are meaningful, or they desperately search for meaning, even sometimes unsuccessfully. And I think that that is actually something that happens to a lot of pre-meds. I think a lot of people that succeed as pre-meds are not able to find these smaller pleasures as easily. They maybe don't fit in with a social group. Maybe they're not joining a fraternity, or they're not, you know, doing a lot of the fun things that are available to them in college. And it's not necessarily out of discipline. Like, I don't think they're getting invited to all of this stuff all the time and then choosing to prioritize studying and to prioritize becoming a doctor. I think, in fact, part of the reason some people are so successful at this is because they're not invited to these things, because they don't actually have the choice. And so it's not just about discipline. They're actually having to sacrifice much less than other people might have to sacrifice that are included in a large social circle, that are invited to lots of activities, these sorts of things. Now, don't get me wrong, of course, a lot of pre-meds succeed as pre-meds and also have a great balance between enjoying themselves and studying, and also getting invited to go to parties isn't necessarily fulfilling. I think there's this big emphasis. People like to, have someone in on one side of the frame that's like studying and going to the gym, and that's doing like the quote unquote good things, and there's someone that's like going to parties and drinking and experiencing all the pleasures. But if you've ever actually done those things, you know that like just drinking or doing these sorts of things is not, it's not actually that enjoyable. At least, look, it's all subjective. So for me, it's like that sort of thing is not even as enjoyable as like going on like a backpacking trip, or going snow camping or skiing or riding my motorcycle. Like, it's a little subjective, so don't get me wrong, maybe that is like a pleasurable activity for some people. But I think that just that like drawing, it's like, oh, you're like giving in. It's like you're not really sacrificing that much if your options are like going to bars frequently, or studying and going to the gym. It's like, you know, you're not sacrificing as much as you might think. And you also don't have to like completely polarize and do one or the other. It's like you can moderate and not like drink way out of control when you do hang out with your friends and go to the bar and like play pool or whatever. So, anyway, that's like the first part of the whole thing. But my main emphasis in this video is on that search for meaning in the face of having a hard time finding small pleasures. It's like, I've told this story on the channel before, but I picked up a pre-med student that was going to Berkeley in the ambulance while I was working in Oakland, California. And she was like considering suicide, and we took her to a psychiatric facility. And the other people I had taken to that facility were actually having some serious psychological problems. Some of them were schizophrenic, some of them were like threatening to kill people and having delusions, and they had more serious psychiatric diagnoses. And she, I think, was just struggling with this problem. She was struggling to find meaning in the face of not being able to find pleasure. And I think she was trying to focus all that energy into becoming a pre-med, into becoming a doctor, and for that to be meaningful. But I think that maybe she wasn't finding meaning there, and she was struggling to find any pleasure, and maybe she was excluded from social groups and from some of the smaller enjoyable things that everyone seems to be expected to do when they're younger. Another thing too is it's like as you get older, your perspective starts to change. I remember when I was a freshman in college, if I was like in my dorm room on a weekend or just when I was in my dorm room, I had a very heavy feeling that I like shouldn't be there, that I needed to be like getting experiences, a little bit of like fear of missing out and those sorts of things. It was intense. Like it made me deeply uncomfortable to be just studying in my dorm room by myself for some reason. And then now that I've graduated, that's completely gone. It's like I still actually though do have a feeling of like I need to get out of Eugene and travel the world. That's a whole different thing. I feel like I have a very short period of time here during my gap year where I'm like hanging out in Eugene doing a little bit of data collection for my research project, and I'm missing out on this short window of opportunity to like take my motorcycle to Mexico, to travel to lots of different countries and go surfing. And it's kind of interesting because I actually feel that like fear of missing out, heaviness, intensity, much less, even though the things I'm missing out on right now by being in Eugene are arguably way more pleasurable and meaningful and enjoyable experiences, which is kind of weird. It's like I would encourage you if you're a pre-med right now and you're in the same situation as maybe I was, or maybe the girl I picked up in the ambulances, where you're so worried about missing out on parts of the college experience. Well, first of all, I think a little bit of that is good. I think you should try to like reach out and participate in social things to whatever extent that's possible. But I do think you should try to, consider more broadly that it's not that big a deal. The more important stuff is later when you take your gap year, and that's when you really should travel and have some of those experiences. Um, but I guess to keep this video shorter, um, big picture is people. You don't need to praise people so much for quote unquote sacrificing, because some of those people didn't really have to sacrifice as much as you might think. Some of them were just excluded from doing lots of fun social things. Maybe they're just not, maybe they're introverts, or maybe they don't get pleasure from a lot of things other people their age get pleasure from. And so they focus elsewhere. I think it's a little bit of a myth to say that, like, you know, to succeed as a doctor, you have to sacrifice everything else. I think that's like a more systemic thing. It's like a lot of the people that are studying to become doctors are very neurotic. They are very focused on like pretty insignificant things, like little things for their resume, little things that don't really matter because in the end, it's a pass fail system pretty much. You're accepted to medical school, you're not. And then once you're in, it's pass fail for most of them for the classes. It's two options: you become a doctor or you don't. And the other stuff, like the prestige of the medical school and these sorts of things, I don't, I don't think that's worth, freaking out about. And I think a lot of people that do focus on those things are suffering from like the inverse Frankel's law or whatever, where they are having a hard time finding pleasurable things, so they're hyper focusing on like purpose and meaning and stuff. So anyway, hopefully this was like an interesting thing. I just recently watched the video and wanted to sort of share my thoughts on it. So that's really all I got. If you thought it was interesting, if you want to follow me on my journey to becoming a doctor, I've done 3 interviews now, and I'll probably do updates throughout the cycle. And if I hopefully am accepted somewhere, I will share that as well. But follow me on the journey, click the buttons below the video. That's all I got.